What's going on, guys? We've got a fun video today. We're talking about how smart remodelers build a sellable business so that you can exit to private equity at a 8x multiple. A little caveat: this is obviously not going to be legal advice. You want to get in touch with somebody who's an expert in this, who'll actually be able to do a deep dive in your business, give you the relevant advice. I have someone that I know who does this. If you guys want a suggestion, I mean a referral. But anyways, I would suggest you go down that route. And beyond that too, like this matters even if you never sell, right? This is not about chasing an exit necessarily. The same systems of private equity values also generally reduces stress, stabilizes hiring, smooths your seasonality, improves margins, makes the expansion better, gives you more leverage, makes it more predictable. And at the end of the day, a business built to be sellable is usually a better business to run. And when we even talk about private equity, right, like we don't need to make it a buzzword or something to be wary of, right? Either sort of view kind of misses the point. At the end of the day, private equity doesn't magically make businesses better. It's just people or entities are looking for companies where systems work and capital can amplify what's working, plus their experience, their feedback, their input can actually amplify, grow the business. They get a return on investment that way. Now, if the foundation is strong, private equity will accelerate growth, but if it's weak, your problems are going to surface faster. And this video is going to break down what private equity firms actually look like when things go right, why deals like Renovo Homes went wrong, and also I'll show you two examples of where it actually went pretty well. First of all, right, private equity is not going to be a strategy. It's not magic either. It's just a capital and scaling mechanism. Like a PE firm is not going to buy your hustle, your founder grind, your we've always done this way, your heroics, your ego. They're not going to buy the hustle, the grind that you might be proud of necessarily. What they want to buy is predictability. Your marketing and growth ends up being a major part of that. And I want to deep I want to do a deep dive into Renovo Home so that you can see more of what I'm talking about. So with Renovo Home, by the way, if you don't know them, they went Chapter 7 bankrupt. They filed for bankruptcy in November, like 2 months ago. It was a pretty nasty bankruptcy because the company had like several different regional partners in the remodeling space. And in the end, they ended up having assets less than, I think, $1,000, but their liabilities were in the $100 million to $500 million range, which is insane, right? Chapter 7 bankruptcy is also where there's absolutely nothing left. Like there are other forms of bankruptcies where you can break up the company, the assets still have value. There's at least something left, but here there was nothing. So it was the worst form of bankruptcy. Now, this is just my analysis based on what we see outside. Obviously, there will be other information inside that would be relevant. First of all, is that the integration complexity outpaced control. So they did acquire a lot of strong regional brands, but the systems were not unified fast enough. Their processes were fragmented across locations, and this type of variation, this type of differences among the same company created a lot of operational drag. So they ended up getting a lot more complexity than they got control. They got a lot of centralization, like, they tried to do it, but there wasn't enough standardization. So they have different brands, they operate in not the same way. So your sale processes were varying, your ops maturity were varying, your reporting consistency lagged, your inputs were not standardized, right? And that gap created friction. Now, obviously, this is not enough to just make them bankrupt. There were some other issues too. They had operational strain at scale. So, a big issue, right, is that they were trying to expand very quickly, right? They, like, one of the reasons why private equity was even, like, the private equity firm was even interested in them was because during COVID time, remodelers, at least from what I saw, grew a lot faster than what was normal. And at that time, like when Renovo was formed, their multiples are also a lot higher. And right now, like let's just say 23, 24, 25, and now coming into 26, growth has slowed down. It's rebounded a bit. It's matured a little bit more in the sense like it's come back to normal. And they tried to expand thinking that they could continue COVID levels of expansion, but that ended up increasing pressure on on their installation capacity, the labor availability, the project management, the customer experience. And because the operations were stressed, the margins tightened a lot. And that type of stress compounded quickly because of different organizations operating in different ways and just pressure overall. They had a large dependence on continued expansion. So they wanted to continue acquiring newer brands. They wanted to add revenue through the mergers and acquisitions. And again, this works when capital markets are friendly, but it becomes very fragile when conditions tighten. So this was a balance sheet risk, not necessarily marketing or the growth problem, but the way how they approach their growth. And this again ties to what I told you about how COVID times the growth was faster, and the capital markets ended up not being as friendly in 23, 24, 25. The demand and delivery were not perfectly matched. So now, from the outside, right, one of the biggest challenges appeared to be aligning demand generation with delivery capacity. Also, maintaining a consistent customer experience across markets. When you have issues with this, when you have misaligned demand generation and delivery capacity, like think about it pretty simply, right? You literally have people who've paid deposits but they end up waiting too long, they end up complaining. You have people who want to get your service but you don't have delivery in certain places, but other places it's empty. You don't have a consistent customer experience that leads to bad reviews, bad uh, feedback. And honestly, a lot of kitchen and bath businesses rely so much, remodeling businesses in general, they rely so much on referrals. Like if your customer experience tanks, you're going to basically get punished for it. When your demand and your ops drift out of sync, your performance will degrade even if your revenue looks strong. Your culture and local autonomy tension, right? Generally, when you're rolling up businesses, they often struggle with preserving local leadership autonomy while enforcing centralized discipline, right? If this is not handled carefully, this does create internal resistance, slower execution, diluted accountability, and it's a people and structure problem, not necessarily the strategy. Like roll-ups work pretty well, and I'll even show you an example where acquiring other brands works well. The issue is preserving that local leadership, right? Like making sure that they do have autonomy, but at the same time you have centralized discipline. And it ends up being a more complicated problem in practice, at the very least not as something like human beings can't solve or that a lot of people can't solve, but that you need to give it enough time, attention, and intention also. And again, like a big issue with Renova homes is that they were just trying to do too much too quickly without having the proper systems in place. And the fair takeaway, right, because it's pretty important too, like private equity is not going to be bad. Roll ups do work, marketing does exist, right? They did try that, but the issue was their pace of growth versus their system maturity, the integration into the unified brand versus balancing that with the autonomy of local partners, their expansion versus operational resilience. And these are common failure nodes in aggressive roll-ups, especially in complex labor heavy industries like remodeling. So even with Lenovo, right, it's not necessarily an example of bad intent or a bad strategy, a bad thesis, but it's just to show how fast expansion it's going to expose operational and integration gaps that already exist. Like again, private equity is not going to be magic, it's just an amplifier, it's a magnifier. And it's something important to keep in mind. Like the type of businesses that work really well in private equity would be great for you to run yourself to. When it comes to what these firms actually look for, let's see. First thing is going to be when the deals go really well, they want to see certain signals, right? They want to look at consistent lead flow without constant intervention. They want to have diversified acquisition channels so that there's no key channel risk. They want to have clear attribution across the funnel. Like you want to know where your money is going, where your revenue is going, where your expenses are going, where you're getting money from, where your clients are coming in from. And you want to have documented marketing processes. Now, this ties into systems alongside the entire business. In general, you want to have stuff that's documented and systemized. And alongside sales processes that are standardized and repeatable, capacity planning that aligns with demand too. That's why you also need a forecast. You want to have operational systems that scale without breaking delivery, which is pretty important, especially when you're that labor heavy. And you basically have projects that are intensive in nature in terms of capital, labor, in terms of allocation of resources. And that's why you want to have systems that can actually scale without breaking the delivery. And you want to have leadership teams that definitely understand how growth impacts margin and execution. They have visibility on numbers, they have clarity on what's the next step that they want to take, that they have to take, and what's the consequences of those steps. And in these cases too, something that's very important is that marketing is not treated like a standalone vendor function, right? It's treated as a part of operating infrastructure that supports planning, forecasting, and scale. Again, it all ties down back into predictability. Like if you currently have vendors, like it's fine if you're just using them and you like need them, but it's not fine if you let that need stay and you don't work on improving that. Think about it this way, right? Like, would your business really be worth buying if it literally relies on like five different vendors? Like, sure, you're reducing risk in a way because you have different vendors, but if you don't have something as important as growth internalized and controlled, or you're not building on that, in 3 to 5, 7 years, you're going to be in the same place where you're relying on people and you're literally buying leads from them. And so that's one thing I wanted to go over. Like, you definitely want to make sure you're not relying on vendors if you're trying to sell your business. It would just make it more tricky for sure. When it comes to the marketing and growth engine that private equity actually values, and again, I want to go into marketing and growth because that's something that I have greater depth and experience in. It would just make more sense with me going over that. Plus, like an actual entire video over like private equity and entire business, like a full business course would take way too long. So we're just going over the overview over here. From a buyer's perspective, right? Strong marketing is going to look like this. Like you have demand creation. So you have demand creation and you have demand capture. They're separated. Your lead quality is going to be predictable. Your qualification protects sales capacity. So you don't want to have this where you use your sales on every single type of lead possible and your sales capacity is drained by poor qualification. You want to instead have such strong qualification where your sales capacity is always used in the best way possible. Like your people are always used on the best types of inquiries, or at least those inquiries that meet your standards. You want to have conversion rates that are stable over time. That's why you need to have a unified process that comes with experience, documenting stuff, and obviously testing around, Uh, your CRM data. You want that to be trusted. Your reporting should be boring and consistent. Trust me, in business, boring is the best. Even I've learned this through experience. Boring is the best because that's where that happens when you're consistent. You want to have decisions that are made weekly, not reactively either, and not monthly, not quarterly. Like you need to be nimble. Like the one of the biggest differences I've seen is when bigger companies don't work well. Now again, if you are a 7, 8, 9 figure company and beyond, you have access to resources, people, results, reviews, testimonials, brand value, And that's what helps you beat, let's just say, a newcomer, right? Like that's the difficulty. But one of the reasons why somebody who's newer tends to upend, the authority, and tries to, and basically ends up creating a place for themselves, a new business, a new company, a startup works because they're more nimble. Like that's one of the most fundamental qualities in a startup. You need to have speed. And it's not necessarily a startup where you need to have that. Even if you're in business for 10, 20, 30 years, you want to still have speed. You want to be nimble. You don't want to be chaotic, but you want to be nimble. And it's pretty important. And in general, you want to make decisions based on numbers, right? That's how you want to have forecasting. And that's what allows leverage. And that type of leverage is what private equity pays for. Again, it all ties down back into predictability. Like that is the core reason why any sort of person would buy your business or invest in your business. And that's just something that you would want to keep in mind. So we have gone over quite a bit. What were the issues with Renovo? What do you want to look at? Now I want to go over when this goes right, right? Like we want to look at examples on what should we do, Angad? Like what should we look at if you want to make things go right? I'm gonna use two examples. Renuity is a US based home improvement platform, by the way. They focus on exterior and interior remodeling. Now, their strategy has been to build a national platform through acquisitions, and they're trying to keep local brands operating in their markets, but they're under the Renuity umbrella. Under the Renuity umbrella, and if you've noticed, even like their logos are in the same color, for example, like it's the same type of branding. Just each of the local brands still keeps their own name, their trust, etc. With Scylla, it's again, in the sister service, like it's other contracting services. They focus more on HVAC, plumbing, electrical, and they expanded regionally again through acquisitions, and later they also attracted private equity investment after proving that it works. With Renuity, we have four things that I want to go over that they did right. So they built the platform for accelerating acquisitions, right? Their core systems like marketing, reporting, back office was centralized early. So their newer brands plugged into something that already worked. They also balanced organic growth with mergers and acquisition. Now, growth should not only rely on buying revenue, right? Organic demand was measured, it was forecasted and managed across brands, and that's what you should be doing too. Like I think people always see extremes in opinion, right? And I'll be completely transparent too. I help businesses with paid demand, but I've never ever dissuaded any sort of company from focusing on organic demand or from keeping that visible, right? Like keeping that something that's a serious part of the acquisition strategy. Like I would never stop you all from focusing on it. But at the same time, you can't only rely on organic demand. That's why you want to have diversified acquisition so that it's more predictable. Again, you want to actually go deeper on each acquisition channel too. You don't want to neglect them or be shallow over there. When it comes to standardized inputs, you want to make sure like your brands keep your local presence, right? You can't kill their identity because that's the type of trust, the name, the value is extremely important. The culture is important, but your demand generation, your data should be consistent, and that is what they did really well, I feel, in unifying stuff. Now they did treat marketing as infrastructure. They like it is a part of the operating model. It's not a vendor function. That did reduce dependence on founders and also smooth their integration because they were able to basically control demand to a very large extent, right? Control revenue to a large extent. And recently, I think, I'm not sure if this was in 2024, 2025, they're doing like 800 million a year in revenue across their firms. And like that type of size, there's definitely lessons to be learned. Even if you're not currently doing stuff like this, it's definitely worth exploring. Yeah, okay. I double check that. These guys did 664 million in 2022. I think they did about around 800 million in 2024. And I think that's when they were acquired by the Greenbrier. equity group. Okay, that's cool. Now let's look at Scylla. This is more focused on HVAC, plumbing, electrical. Obviously, that's not as high ticket, but it can still be low to mid to high ticket. What did Scylla do right? Right, they focused on a narrow vertical. These are similar services. They're sister services essentially. They have similar sales cycles. Their customer behavior was simpler. So standardization was quite simple, and that reduced operational friction because again, there's predictability. That's when you can actually standardize, systemize stuff. It reduces friction. It allows people to work better. It allows you to predict better. It allows the leadership to lead the business better. And they sequence growth correctly too. So, like their systems, the leadership, the processes were in place before they scaled aggressively with capital, which is extremely important. And they kept leadership close to execution. So, their local management stayed involved while their central functions like marketing, ops were standardized, which is pretty important, right? Like when it comes to the day to day, you want to have A players in place. So that's why you want to keep your local management still there. You want them to have a pretty good level of autonomy. Whereas at the same time, for functions like marketing, like ops, that you can standardize, that you will be spending a ton of capital, a ton of attention, a ton of human capital on, that is when you need to keep that standardized. And that's when scale comes into play. They also used marketing to stabilize the expansion, right? It wasn't just supposed to be top line growth. They actually tried to use their marketing and their growth efforts to actually support their integration, right? So that if somebody is just coming in, for example, a new company is just being integrated, they still have their demand at a good level where it does not affect their revenue in a negative way, their bottom line in a negative way, and the company is functioning on a healthy level. That is where it is useful. Why? Again, because there's predictability and control. That's basically what it ties down to all the time. Now, what's their shared pattern, right? Both Renewity and Scylla, they standardized systems before they scaled aggressively. They balanced their acquisitions with organic growth and with their paid growth. They aligned their demand with the delivery capacity. So even if it comes down to demand generation, organic demand, you want to make sure that you have extreme clarity on your delivery capacity and always try to make it as congruent as possible. They also reduce the dependency on the founders and the individual vendors. That's why you want to standardize it under an umbrella. Again, it comes down to control predictability. So again, with what I said about private equity, like it's going to amplify models that are already coherent. It's not going to replace missing systems, right? It's like this is what going right actually looks like in practice. And I'll use another example of like a billionaire. I was just like listening to his interview. The guy is now involved into private equity. I think he's worth probably around a billion, billion and a half. The guy looks at 100 companies a month, around 100, and he only invests in four a month, right? Like private equity firms are not going to look at every single, I mean, they will look at more companies, but they're not going to invest in every single company. Like they're very careful around where they're putting their capital and their attention. And so if you want to build something that's PE worthy, like again, it's not even evil, it's just like it's just logical. Like I think it's something important to look at when it comes to PE is like if you make a PE worthy firm, it's a good thing for you and the PE, and the possible acquisition. Like why wouldn't you want to have that option, clarity, and a sustainable predictable business? It's just something to keep in mind. It's more like you need to meet certain standards that are higher than what average remodelers reach, much higher than what average remodelers go by and what they have in place. So that's what I'd suggest. Like it's not something evil. Like just keep your opinions around PE kind of open. You don't have to sell it either. But I think like one important thing is just about keeping the systems and the business structure in place where it's possible to sell. But at the very least, you have a better business in place. Now, marketing in general is going to be very central to valuation because it answers critical questions, right? Can this business grow without the founder or without any sort of person and any sort of key man? You want to minimize key man risk, where you're able to grow the business without any sort of one person being the linchpin or being the person who will inhibit the growth of the company. Can it be forecasted? Can it be increased without chaos? Can new locations plug into an existing system? Is it resilient across cycles, across seasons, across different years, across decades? Okay, maybe decades is a little bit too further away, but if it helps, I mean, if you have that in place, that would be fantastic. It would just help it be at a higher valuation. Now, if the answer is no for any of these questions, valuation drops or almost becomes negligible compared to what it should be. And it's not because your revenue might be bad, but because the risk is high and the predictability is low. So, private equity is not going to create good businesses. It just exposes whether one already exists. If your marketing is a system, your growth will compound. If your marketing is a scramble, if it's not in place, everything becomes fragile. And what I want to basically say is this, right? Like smart remodelers will build the engine first, the options will come later. I hope this video was helpful to you guys. I'm always open to conversations like this about business, private equity, the way you guys have your systems. If you ever are interested in an outside in look, I could always help. And a bit of a sneak peek into why I'm even doing this, right? Is a little example. So I mean, it's a little story. So I basically have worked with quite a few clinics. Like that's what my company was working with before for the last few years. I ended up seeing just such a silly issue with the types of businesses I was working in, where we'd literally be able to bring in revenue for them, we'd be able to bring in clients, but they might not want to provide that service anymore. They might mismanage their funds. They might not even realize the importance of spending on demand generation, on client acquisition. They might also be bad at sales. Like, there was just so many fundamental issues, and that's why I am working with remodelers now, like 7 and 8 figure remodelers, because I want to work with businesses where my efforts also actually make a greater difference. Plus, businesses who have the fundamentals in place, like you have basic ops in place, you have basic sales in place, that sort of allows marketing or growth related activities to really shine and show their true value. And it's definitely inhibited in businesses that don't have that in place. Beyond that, I even saw like you might have seen the older video where I'd consulted a multi seven figure company in the Netherlands, right? They're a service based company only. I realized how much good marketing is missing even from bigger companies. Like a lot of remodelers too, especially, just share so much of what I saw in that company, where you're basically around for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, 5 decades or higher. You basically have worked a lot across different generations, and you've relied a ton on organic growth, on reviews, on referrals, on word of mouth, which is fantastic. But I see so many brands where they don't have the right type of paid acquisition in place, which should definitely be able to add an extra 10, 20, 30, 50% in top line. And even if they have worked with people, it's definitely been with people who don't care enough. Like it's been with people who are lead vendors, who only take a retainer, who don't work enough on ads, who don't actually look at the different aspects of the funnel properly, of the sales cycle properly. And they don't focus on the most important part of the business, which is more revenue at a profitable margin. And that's essentially my selfish intent. Like that's what I want to help the modeling firms with. At the very least, I'd be fine with having a conversation, seeing where things are in your business, at least helping guide you better from my own perspective and experience, helping companies grow. And at the very least, I could help you see a bit more about the marketing and the growth side. If you do want to have a conversation, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, or email is also fine. If you'll want me to cover any other topics, you can write down below. I will be going into a deeper dive on Renuity and Scylla, just because just because I think it's important. to see which direction you want to move in as you're trying to scale higher, especially if your goals are multi seven figures, multi eight figures, even reaching nine figures. Thanks for watching.